It's been 1 year of President Bola Tinubu since he assumed office as President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic. And we've talked about a couple of things. First was the security situation. You just listened to the Chief of Army Staff. We had before then spoken to experts, analysts who are also in the know as far as security in the country is concerned. But we're shifting gears now to the issue of the economy, that reality that faces all of us. Literally, everybody's an economist in his own way or the other. But we're bringing the experts to speak to us exactly what the numbers look like from then to now. But I'm not doing this alone. I'm being joined by our business anchor, John Mekwa.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be on this side of the studio, different from our business studio, which we do daily.
Absolutely. So, I know that you have a reason for being here. So let's walk through it.
I'm passionate about the economy. That's why I'm here.
You like the numbers?
I love
Absolutely.
them. Yeah,
like
they tell you the reality.
So you're going to tell us the facts behind the figures.
Okay, but we'll start with Mr. Bismarck Rewani, the Chief Executive Officer. He has the numbers, as we know, and he has numbers with pictures. I trust him to have that. Mr. Rewani, good evening, and thank you for joining the conversation. I know you're going to talk beyond the numbers soon, but let's see. I know you want to paint a picture 1 year after. I think you have a major question. Are you better off today? There you are.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The question today, let's put some context into what we want to talk about. 365 days after, 1 year later, are you better off now than you were last year? And do you hope to be better off at this time next year? So that's the question we're asking ourselves. 1 year ago, there were promises, policies, and announcements. The first promise President Tinubu made was to increase GDP to $1 trillion in 8 years. Before then, our GDP was almost $400 billion. So actually to double it in 8 years. He removed petroleum subsidies. He unified exchange rates. He promised to overhaul the security infrastructure. You just heard that now. And he also promised to double the power generation, which was 5,000 megawatts then to 10,000 megawatts in a period of 5 years, which means he promised to increase power by 1,250 megawatts every year. And he also promised to bring inflation under control. These were the promises, these were the announcements, and these were the policies. Next. So the highlights of these policies and announcements were that major policy changes were announced in 2023, including the $1 trillion GDP goal. The time lag between policy announcements and efforts effect was a drag on outcomes. The unintended consequences are leading to social unrest. There's a cost of living crisis in Nigeria. The minimum wage negotiation will be a source of widespread conflict, and the wrong sequencing of reforms is taking its toll on output. Nigeria needs new borrowing to refinance existing obligations, and policy changes, institutional reform, and new borrowings will lead to positive and faster growth in the period 2025 to 2026. Next. Now, what are we seeing? The economic weakness is partly structural and mostly exogenous. Exogenous means from outside, but structural means fundamental. So what are the structural challenges? Rent-seeking market structure, energy crunch, 4,000 megawatts, regulatory bottlenecks, declining labor productivity, and demographic pressures, including urbanization. Exogenous shocks, COVID disruption after COVID, global supply chain disruption, political tension, high global interest rates, transitory developments, cost of living crisis, wage agitation, and social unrest. Next, please. Now, what really happened? This is very important. What happened in the last 1 year? Before, we're growing at 2.91%. That was last year. After, we are now growing at 2.87. So our growth has actually declined by 0.04. Headline inflation was 22.41 last year when Bola Tinubu took office. It is now 33.69. So it has deteriorated by 11.28%. And this food inflation was 24.82. It is now 40.53. It has deteriorated by 15.71%. The exchange rate on May 29 last year was 765 in the power market, 765 naira to a dollar. Today it's at 1,520. It has lost essentially it has more or less doubled, and it's gone down by 100%. Difference between parallel and official market, official rate. The difference in May 29 last year between the parallel market and the official rate was 295 naira to $1. Today, because the official rate has been adjusted in the last 2 days, it is now, the difference is now 346 naira. So it has actually deteriorated. The price of diesel at this time last year was 840 naira a liter. Today it's 1,200. Don't forget, this diesel price had gone all the way to 1,700, but thanks to Dangote, they brought it down to 1,200, and it's off by 43%. Petrol at the pump, PMS, was selling at 190, highly subsidized. Today it's 580, in most parts of the country, 617 naira. So the price of petrol has actually increased by 205%. But generally speaking, efforts were commendable, but outcome was average. Now let's go to oil production. We are producing 1.15 million barrels of oil a day. Last year, this time, we are now producing 1.28, which is a marginal increase of about 11%. Federal Allocation Committee was sharing 10.2, total FAC last year was 10.92 trillion. Guess what? Because subsidy removal and reduction, we now are sharing 14.39 trillion. So revenue accrued and revenue shared has increased by 31.78%. The deficit as a percentage of GDP was 4.21% of GDP, and now it's gone to 5.50% of GDP. One, because GDP has reduced, but revenue has increased, but it's a negative variable. Real positive interest rates, it was minus 4.55, and at this time last year, it is now minus 7.21. So it has deteriorated by 2.66%. Total external debt was $42.7 billion. Today, it is $42.5 billion, so it has improved a little bit. External debt per head, every Nigerian was owing $179. Last year, they are now owing only $178 per head. The gross external reserves was $35 billion last year. It has dropped by 7% to $32 billion. The minimum wage as of last year was 30,000 naira per head, per man, per month, and now it's open to bargain. Next slide. So, economic impact and unintended consequences. This is the big picture. The gross fixed investment, which drives growth, was $154 billion last year. It is now down to $105 billion, down by 31%. The stock market capitalization, positive. It was 30 trillion naira at this time last year. Now it is up to 55 trillion naira, up by 83%. So stock market investors are making money. National savings as a percentage of GDP was 33% by this time last year, is down to 29%. Life expectancy at this time last year was 55.8. It has improved by about 3 months to 56.1. Ships awaiting berth at the ports in Nigeria were 12 at this time last year. They are now up to 15, so it has improved by 25%. And grid collapses were 12 times last year. That means the grid collapsed once every month, but this time it has collapsed only 5 times, so some improvement there. Next. So in general, we have the good, we have the bad, and we have the ugly. What is the good? Tax and other revenues have more than doubled. FAC increased to 14.39 trillion. Dangote refinery and other modular refineries have commenced operations. Forex backlog has been cleared. Credit rating upgraded to B. Outlook, oil production increased to 1.34, and international fares have actually reduced. What is the bad? Nigeria used to be 32nd largest economy in the world. Today we are now 42. In Africa we're number 1, but now we are down to number 4. Inflation, which was at 24%, is now 33.69%. Our public debt has risen to 97 trillion. What is the ugly? Terrorist attacks continue. Power grid collapse is there. Exit of multinationals, e.g. Procter & Gamble, escalating cost of living, and there's a crisis there. This is food inflation, and you can see it here. It's rising, and driven by post-harvest losses, insecurity challenges, and poor storage. So this is bad news. So how does it affect you, where you're sitting down at home, and in and Jeffrey. One, at this time last year, you bought a bag of rice for 35,000. Today, you're buying it at 80,000. It has increased by 129%. It actually got up to 95,000. Gari, very, very difficult. Gari was 28,000 a bag at this time last year. It is now 50,000. As a matter of fact, it crossed this and went back. Beans has become a major problem. Beans was 30,000 naira at this time last year. It is now 95,000. It's gone up by 217%. You need beans for protein. A loaf of bread at this time last year was 900 naira. It's now 1,600. And a tuber of yam was 2,000 naira at this time last year. It is now 10,500. And guess what? The big problem is tomatoes. Yeah. Tomatoes was 40,000 a bag at this time last year. It is now 150,000.
Yeah, but Mr. Rwani, we hear there's so many factors feeding to this, especially the tomatoes. There's the news of pests. It's a planting season, you know, and so I mean, is it just the economy or the other things?
No,
I think you can.
I'm not done. This is evidence-based analysis. Right. This is a fact.
All right, Mr. Rwani, apparently we have a lot to talk about. Yes. We're racing against time, and we know you have a seat on the table.
Well, so let me just
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Next slide, please. There's a non-food basket. This is you did the food basket.
Then
transport for Lagos to Abuja. At this time last year, it cost you 20,000 to go by night bus. Now it's 33,000. It's up 68%. Or Balende to Woronshoki. It was 300 naira this time last year. It's now 500, up 67%. Lagos to Abuja was 38,000 last year. This time it's now 80k, 111%. And Lagos to London, thank God, is now dropped from 2.6 million to 1.4 million.
We say thanks to Air Peace for that.
Thanks, sir. And finally, so our ranking amongst African countries has actually declined. In other words, we used to be our GDP growth is 2.98, and South Africa is 1.93. Kenya has 4%, Ghana has 3.8%. Inflation, we are 33, South Africa is 5%, Kenya is 5%, Ghana is 25%. GDP per head, that is our wealth.
Yeah.
Every Nigerian is worth only $1,111. Guess what? South Africa, every South African is worth $6,700. Kenya, $2,000. And Ghana, 2,200. We never in the past, we were always richer than Ghana. And now we are here. External reserves as percentage of GDP, the figures speak for themselves. So the picture is looking tough, but
yeah, so many things obviously feed into this.
Some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah,
I think we should bring in the other guest.
That's why I said Mr. Rwani has a seat on the table. He has questions to answer. We're going to look at those drivers, but it's not just the only one that will be on the panel today. We're going to be joined by a couple of other people who are in the know when it comes to these numbers, because you know those figures don't lie. So we have joining us via Zoom the managing consultant, CEO, Flame Academy and Consulting Limited, Oji Udumeziwe. We also have Dr. Wisdom Enang, oil and gas expert, joining us as well via Zoom. We also have Nkoyo Toyo, former member of the House of Representatives and development activist. She joins us from our Abuja studio, as well as Mr. Taiwo Yedele, the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. So it's a big team, gentlemen and ladies. So where do we start from?
Maybe from Oji Udumeziwe. I hope that you did hear those numbers from Mr. Rwani. And the good thing is he ended with some reality check, which is the price of Gari, the price of yam, the price of transport, you know, from last year to about this time this year. And we do know that international institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, they've been saying that, well, the president has taken the right step. The harsh but necessary policy reforms. Would you say it's worth it? Looking at 1 year of Udumeziwe, please.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ini, and your team. Sending my greetings from the city on 1,000 hills. I'm in Kigali at the moment, and I thank God for Nigeria, and I pray that we'll make progress going forward. These numbers are very scary. Nigerians are, very badly impoverished, and they are suffering greatly at this point. People are begging now, not just those who are unemployed, even those who are working, their salary cannot take them home. There is so much hardship. So you can say that in the past 1 year, Nigerians have been left much, much worse off than they were a year ago, and that's the reality. Everybody is feeling the pinch. The numbers are not looking good. I wish that my own friend and senior brother had also shared our current debt service to GDP ratio, as well as our current debt to GDP ratio itself. These numbers are scary. Nigeria is poor. Nigeria is begging for money. Nigeria cannot fund its budget, and the future is not looking so bright. So the issue is, apart from policy announcements, what background work do we do before we make these announcements and begin to implement? People have said they are commendable policies. We are doing some, very bold reforms in the, foreign exchange market, trying to reform to bring the gap between the official and the foreign market close. But all these policies, were not well planned before they were, they just started.
All right, Mr. let's because we are pressed for time. I apologize, we're pressed for time, and we have a big panel. So I want to throw as much questions to everybody as much as possible. Let me come to you, Nkoyo Toyo, on this particular one. The macroeconomic data dashboard, most of them in the bearish region, as you've seen from Mr. Rwani's presentation. And we've seen interventions, but we don't know how much of that has moved the needle. So when you look at the numbers, as well as the intervention that has come through, do you think this was well thought through?
Thank you very much for having me. The question of whether it was thought through or not is, I think, something all of us will bear testimony to the fact that there isn't actually that thoroughness in terms of whether it was thought through or not. The moment Mr. President said to us and to the whole country that on the 29th of May last year that he was taking away the subsidy, he said subsidy is gone. And he said that wasn't part of his speech, but it came through. Even the suggestion that that was originally not part of his speech and then came through, to that extent, told us quite a bit about where the direction of that was going. Some policies are needed, but you need to also apply some sort of rigorousness in terms of how you implement. I think the act of statecraftship requires that we look beyond just the announcements and begin to ask ourselves whether these announcements have implications for the rest of the country. I must say that generally what I have heard presented this evening, speaks to the dire need for us to ask the question, how much of this was about the people and how much of this was about a preconceived understanding of what the challenges of the economy itself is. It's one thing to think about the economy from the lens of the IMF, the lens of the World Bank, and from the lens of the many people who advise governments. And it's another thing to think about what the consequences and the risk implications that this will bring onto the citizens of the country. I must say that in all the dimensions of this implementation and what we have seen so far, it's been a far cry from what we expected. This last 1 year has been really gruesome for Nigerians and the citizens of this country. I mean, take the thing, a basic thing like beans, moving from 30,000 naira at this time last year to 95,000 naira at this time. It's quite worrisome. Gari, which is also very basic food for everybody, is almost unreachable by the citizens of the country. I must say that what we tend to see more.
Yeah, so yeah. I wanted to just move over to Dr. Wisdom Enang. He's in the oil and gas, and a lot of people have the notion that all of these indices in the red started when the president, even as Nkoyo Toyo has said, started when the president said subsidy is gone. Now, being in that sector, would you say there have been improvements? And now we're hearing of Port Harcourt refinery coming up soon. Dangote refinery already on, expecting petrol from Dangote refinery. Recently, the group's CEO of NNPCL has told us that perhaps we'll be hitting 1.7 million barrels per day production. That's a huge step from where we are. Would you say that sacrifice of subsidy removal has been worth it? Are we in the right path?
I think when we look at the subsidy removal, it was, at the time that it was the subsidy was taken out, I don't think we had that many options as a country, just because of how much the bill was coming up for us and being able to sustain that bill. The other thing is I think the biggest problem that everybody had was the lack of the alternative before the subsidy was taken out. That being said, it is very clear, right, that subsidy removal was always going to create an incentive for the local industries, for example, being the Dangote refinery, which has come out to save the day, just like we saw in the statistics earlier. So it's been a very good development in for the fact that at least we have something in the interim that we can definitely look out for an optimistic future. It would be better if we have the government-owned refineries also looking very optimistic in terms of the actual startup and post-delivery of the fuel to the Nigerian public. Well, yes, the subsidy removal in terms of downstream sector, it was actually very advantageous. And one of the things that we need to understand is the price we were paying for petrol was actually not obtainable anywhere else in West Africa and in most parts of the world. So I think right now, even until now, we're still quite cheaper than a lot of African countries. But then it frees up the sector for investors to come, and it's good to see what the Dangote refinery are doing, more from an interventionist standpoint, to help the Nigerian economy to meet its energy demands, as well as do so in a way that the price is not so harsh on consumers.
All right, so let's bring it back to the studio. Mr. Arwani, I know you threw those numbers at us, so...
I think Mr. Arwani should give us a solution. Haven't done so much research.
No, before we come to solution, the question I wanted to ask him is, we've seen the GDP drop from what it was in 2022.
2023.
2023.
Even the fourth quarter
2023.
2023.
The rate has increased, but in terms of value, it has dropped.
Yes.
And you talked about the per capita income. It has always dropped. So what exactly are we going to be selling to investors when the purchasing power of citizens has come down?
No, I think you have to understand something, that GDP is an output measure, it's not a revenue measure.
Okay.
So if you produce more, and the price of those goods that you're producing actually come down, then your GDP would increase in output, but in terms of financial value, it will not increase. So, but what I didn't say, and the last slide, is what the outlook for the next 12 months. So first question, are you better off now than you were last year? Definitely not. You're struggling. But will you be better off at this time next year? The answer is yes. Why do I say that? Inflation is projected to decline from 33% to 18% in 2025. So by next year, right, end of next year, you'll be at 18% from 33%. That's a significant improvement in inflation. Fiscal stimulus, the federal government is going to put some money into the stimulus package and all of that, and that is about almost 6 to 7 trillion. Impact on GDP is not going to be that much, but it's going to be something. Minimum wage, now we're talking about, the guys are asking for
400,000.
For 490,000 or something, and what's on the table is about 60,000. We think that we'll settle around 90,000. Even if you settle at 90,000, it will be 200%, because the former minimum wage was 30, and you go, can companies afford this? Because if companies cannot afford this, then they are going to lay off people. So the union's aspiration should not just be for wages, but to ensure that their people are at work. So that's another thing. Gross fixed investment is bound to rise sharply in the next year, and the exchange rate will stabilize, in my judgment, at about 1,350 to 1,450, not 1,900 or 2,000.
Or 700.
No, so that's what it is. Economic growth will accelerate to 4 to 5% by 2025, 2026, and Nigeria could regain its position as Africa's largest economy by 2027, 2028.
Yeah, but Mr. Rani, I mean, even the drop in Nigeria's position, the drop in the GDP, a lot has been connected to the fall in the value of the Naira. So is that the realistic, or is it just because of the value of the Naira?
No, part of it is a devaluation of the currency, because you compare when you're comparing GDPs, you use the dollar comparable. But that happens from time to time. But the reality is that Nigeria's growth rate is slower than its population growth rate, 1. 2, Nigeria has not been attracting investments, both domestic and international investment. So whilst we have solved the revenue problem, and Oyedele will attest to that, and that's why we are sharing more money, but the question of growth and investment, we have a growth problem, we have an investment problem, and that has to be addressed. But the time between when you put out those policies and when you get the impact is what we are trying. So for the next 12 months, last 12 months has been average outcome and difficult starting point. Next year, I think we are going to have great effort and above average outcome. All right. That's what I'm saying.
All right, Ms. Algie, let's bring it back to you. Let's talk about productivity, which is a big question. At the end of the day, everybody says productivity, productivity, productivity. Our balance of trade, from the numbers we see from the MBS, I think is in deficit.
Yes.
Ms. Algie Odumeje, if you can give us an answer to this particular question, what are we missing to ramp up production? We have a low-hanging fruit. We are seeing appreciation, but our target, we have not met it. So what are we missing in trying to ramp up production that we're not doing, and we're not seeing those numbers? FDIs maybe is a long-term thing. FPIs are coming in. Their FX accretion is coming in, but they can run away anytime. So let's talk about what we can do to improve our productivity.
Okay, I'll make it as fast as possible. I have a number of recommendations to make. One, Nigeria can never get productive if we don't have power to fuel activities in the economy. It's a major issue, and we're forgetting that we don't give it attention. We cannot run Nigerian economy, at the level of 4,000 to 5,000 watts of electricity. It's never done. It can never be done. Until we improve that, nothing can happen. So I suggest that some of my own opinions, though, some of the white elephant projects that we're talking about, maybe the coastal road from Calabar to wherever, can hold on a bit and we deal with this power issue. Everywhere else in Africa you go to, from Kigali to Nairobi to even other small cities, Freetown and so on, you have nearly 24-hour power supply. Why not Nigeria? Why can't we do that in Nigeria? We need to move to minimum of 20,000 megawatts of electricity for us to ensure productivity. 2, as we fight inflation, let us remember that Nigerian factories and producers can never be competitive if they have to borrow at 40%, 35% as it is right now. That's a productivity killer. Insecurity is a big issue. Because in the GDP measurement, you look at the export-import angle as you consider investment by corporate bodies. We need foreign investment coming in. Nigeria has been having almost a very poor show in foreign direct investment inflow into Nigeria. People are afraid of their lives, and because of bandits and so on, farmers cannot even produce. So local investment is suffering, foreign investment is also suffering. And then, looking at the Naira exchange problem too, that is a major issue for productivity, management. You cannot force an exporter to bring in dollar and exchange at a very low rate. And meanwhile, the person that does nothing gets the dollar and makes a big margin in around tripping. Central bank has to do further work to ensure that the very scarce dollar is efficiently allocated. This crazy idea of trying to create a particular rate and sell to BDCs and so on is never going to work. Let's focus on the reform they are doing already, insisting that market forces play a very big part. While central bank plays some role to try to stabilize the market. If you ask me again, one last point, please. One last point, please. The size of government is still huge. The Orosaya report we said we are going to implement, we haven't had much about it again. And mind you, whatever we have gained in revenue or saved from the subsidy, as long as government spending remains very large, in terms of the current size of government, we we can make progress in terms of productivity.
All right, Mr. Ojidemeze, thank you. Let's go to Ms. Koyo Toyo in our Abuja studio. So I think I'll just speak on the last thing Mr. Ojidemeze talked about, which is the price of gold, the cost of running the government. And we've had some pronouncements by the government, this present administration, reducing ministry, merging them, reducing portfolios and all of that. You are a former member of the House of Representatives. Is it so difficult, to actually, in real terms, reduce the cost of governance, reduce portfolios? I mean, tell us, perhaps it is the legal process that makes it difficult.
Absolutely. I think we have a history of having these big governments and running them as though that, there's this false impression in Nigeria that we're a very wealthy country and anything can happen. Even if you go to the National Assembly, for example, almost every member has a bill to create a university, a college, or something in their constituency or the other ongoing. So there's an endless demand on the side of government to do one thing or the other for a constituent or for the constituencies or the other. So there is an endless demand on one side. But there's also the constitutional question of what can you do and what can you not do outside and within the Constitution. There are things you can do within the Constitution which are legitimate, like, for example, nothing stops Mr. President from reducing the number of ministries he has, and even going to implement the Steve Orosonya report, which he talked about. All of that is within his powers to do. But we've seen that, contrary to the expectations of this government, he went ahead to appoint, I think, 40 or so ministers, which is in excess of what any other president has done. That in itself suggests to us that he wasn't in the business of reducing the number of persons in government. So in as much as that there is scope for him to do something, even within the constitutional ambit of what he hasn't done exactly that to the best of my knowledge. The other thing is that there is an intergovernmental level. I hear Mr. Rwani saying that in terms of revenue, we're seeing a lot more cash. But in terms of the management and use of that cash, we're seeing a lot more less control and less application in terms of solutions that we are looking for in the country. Let me quickly add that as much as I hear him say, Mr. Rwani say that next year the forecast will look better, I wonder what the situation will do for the huge food deficits that the country is going through. Climate change has not been addressed in the context of what it means for the future of food and the security of food, and that's something we need to pay a lot of attention to, and the implications for the long term in the country. I think what we need to see more, I hear him talk about the fiscal stimulus. I think what we need to see more is what the comprehensive plan for the next 4 years is. Let's get away from the flip-flop that we're seeing in policy, where one thing is tried, another thing is almost like an error, to a more certain and more determinable direction in terms of where policy of government is going. So we now know what the implications of removing PMS is. We know the implications of the measure of the exchange rates and all of that. What next do we do? And whatever we do, we must remember that the people are hurting. 90,000 naira is still a far cry in this inflationary context to deal with the extreme aggravated multi-dimensional nature of poverty that has been created in the last 1 year. Anybody who tries to ignore the intensity of that problem is actually also saying to us that, it's important to please the economic parameters and deal with the economic demands of our country.
If I may pause, we're totally out of time. Your thoughts are quite insightful, but we understand we're totally out of time. There's a tradition we have in assessing the president. So let's stay with you. Average, above average, below average in the last 1 year? Just a straight answer, madam. In the management of the economy.
I'm not impressed.
All right, let's come to Mr. Oji. Mr. Oji, if you're there, average, below average, above average?
Well, I will suggest average. I won't say far below average. The intentions have been good, but the timing of the policies have not been right, and the management of those policies are not quite okay. Average, they can do better.
All right, let's go to Ms. Enang. Ms. Enang, quick one. Ms. Enang,
Definitely for me, I'm going to say we need to put into context the fact that the president inherited an economy that was almost failing completely.
All right.
And to put a lot of initiatives to actually even give a viable chance.
All right, although we didn't get it, so let's put it on record. Average, below average, above average. We had a network connection. Average.
Above average.
Above average.
Above average.
Mr. Rwani,
yeah,
you're the numbers man.
Maybe you want to give us percentage.
Efforts commendable.
Okay.
Outcome average.
Wow. We must thank all of you for your insight. Mr. Ojud Meze, Managing Consultant, CEO, Flame Academy and Consulting Limited, Dr. Wizaminang, Oil and Gas Expert. Mrs. Nkoyo Toyo, former member of the House of Representatives and development expert, as well as Mr. Bismarck Rwani, CEO of Financial Derivatives. Thank you so much, as always, gentlemen and lady, for coming through. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, exactly, one of the things I wanted to ask, we didn't have time. We've seen the NNPC numbers good in terms of profit. When they posted negative in 2018, almost a trillion naira, now they're posting 2.2, but their operating margin is something to speak about when you look at the 8 trillion they generated in terms of revenue. Maybe the minister will answer that, but...
Don't worry, we have all of that conversations on Business Morning and Business Incorporated. We always have time there.
All right, John Mekwa joined us to explore the conversation. He's a businesswoman, by the way. All right, thank you so much. Well, we'll take this commercial break and we'll throw it over to our Abuja studios. Join us again.